Could a pancake make you cry? Would you believe it? A seemingly ordinary pancake, yet it carried within it the taste of a lost childhood, of a grandmother who had passed away, of memories that time had seemingly buried. That was a feeling Darren Locke, CEO of the Maple and Hearth breakfast chain, valued at over $40 million, never expected to feel on a drizzling morning at a small branch in Portland. That day, he wasn't there as the CEO. He was there under an alias, Gary Mitchell, a rugged food blogger from Sacramento, tangled hair, an old flannel shirt, a frayed leather bag, and a quiet gaze, as if his only concerns were his morning coffee and a hot plate of pancakes. No one in the diner recognized him, but that was what he wanted. For the past 3 years, he had been secretly visiting his branches just like this, to see the things that financial reports and emails could never convey. But this time was different. The moment the plate was set down, 3 pancakes stacked like soft clouds, a scent suddenly made Darren stop breathing. A light scent of cinnamon, unmeasured vanilla, eggs whipped to the softness of a morning cloud. And strangest of all, it was the smell of memory. Darren picked up his fork, cut a piece, and brought it to his mouth. Time seemed to stand still. He was no longer sitting in a small restaurant in Portland. He was 8 years old, with messy hair, sitting in a wooden kitchen in rural Tennessee. Grandma Rose was humming an old song as she flipped each pancake with an old wooden spatula. Every Sunday after church, she made pancakes as a ritual, not for the food, but for the love. And it was that very pancake that first made Darren understand what it meant to be cared for. But she had passed away when he was only 12, and since then, no one, no recipe, had ever been able to recreate that feeling. Until today. How do you find it? The young manager standing beside him smiled proudly. I call it the Kyle Stack. I invented it myself. Darren nodded, but inside, a storm was raging, because this pancake wasn't just delicious, it was authentic. It was alive. It had a soul, and a soul cannot be copied. It cannot be faked. It cannot emerge from a report or from someone who just wants a cash bonus. And so, the journey began. An unexpected journey that led Darren deep into a secret hidden behind the kitchen. A stolen recipe. A woman living in an old car behind the restaurant, and she was the one who created the magic in the pancake. But the bigger question was, how could someone like her be living invisibly? And what had Darren, a man who thought he saw everything, missed? Food is love made visible. Grandma Rose used to say that. And now, Darren would have to learn how to see love again, in a world that had grown accustomed to ignoring the people who quietly create good things. The pancake was still steaming as Darren set his fork down, his eyes slightly red-rimmed. Kyle, the young manager, was still standing beside him, his eyes expectant, like a student waiting for a test score. "Did you really create this dish?" Darren asked, his voice as casual as if making small talk. "Yes, it's entirely my idea," Kyle replied instantly, his back straightening with confidence. "I tried dozens of recipes, adjusting the flour ratio, adding vanilla, a new way of whipping the eggs. I even used the whites separately to create that light fluffiness." Darren frowned. Everything he said matched the taste he was experiencing. But strangely, as Kyle listed the techniques, there was no emotion in his voice, as if he were reciting from a memorized note. "So, where did you learn to make it like that?" Kyle blinked. "Oh, I just figured it out on my own. I've been passionate about cooking since I was a kid." A perfect answer. Perhaps too perfect. Darren nodded slightly, taking a sip of his coffee. But inside, a flicker of suspicion had sparked. He had met many people who were truly passionate about cooking. They had a fire in their eyes. Their hands were constantly in motion, and they talked about food as if they were talking about their first love. Kyle didn't have that. Darren smiled faintly. "Have you been rewarded for this recipe yet?" "Oh, yes," Kyle replied, unable to hide his excitement. "Corporate just sent me a $5,000 bonus. They said this pancake could become the new icon for the entire chain. Isn't that great?" Darren nodded, this time slowly. "That's great. Indeed." But right after, he quietly opened the Notes app on his phone and typed Kyle Stack recipe. Suspicious. Perfect flavor. Too personal. Must investigate further. Kyle left to attend to other customers. Darren, alone with the now almost cold pancake, couldn't take his eyes off it. He cut another piece, this time very slowly, as if hoping that with each taste, a piece of memory would return. He remembered clearly Grandma Rose never used a printed recipe. She measured flour by feel, added cinnamon from memory, and mixed the batter as if she were lulling a grandchild to sleep. Pancakes are for the heart, not for an industrial kitchen, she used to say. And this flavor, it was exactly that. It wasn't a mass-produced recipe. It was a whisper from the past. Darren decided to stay, not just to investigate, but because his heart had been moved in an unexpected way. "What would you think if I came back for a few days to observe more, write a more in-depth piece about this place?" Darren asked Kyle when he returned. "Oh, that would be an honor." Kyle almost cheered. "Feel free. We have a great team, especially the night shift. There's Nora. She's an incredibly hard worker." Darren nodded, starting to connect the pieces in his mind. Nora, a name he had never heard, but which now suddenly felt strangely important. That evening, at his hotel in downtown Portland, Darren sat at his desk with a cold cup of tea and his laptop open. He reviewed the internal reports for this branch. There was no record of culinary innovation from Kyle. No one at headquarters had mentioned a new recipe until Kyle sent the email claiming credit. He traced back the history of emails, bonus authorizations, the timing of the spike in customers, and then nothing added up. The revenue reports showed a sudden spike starting November 8th, but Kyle had only submitted the recipe to headquarters on the 15th, a 7-day gap. And in Darren's world of business, 7 days was a lifetime for the truth to be buried. He sat in silence for a long time, his eyes fixed on the rain-streaked window of his Portland hotel room. Something had happened in that restaurant. It wasn't Kyle's creation. It was the talent of someone forgotten, A pancake can't spontaneously generate the taste of the past. Someone had to be there, someone who truly put their whole heart into it to make that happen, and he was determined to find that person. Darren returned to Maple and Hearth the next evening, in the role of a dedicated blogger wanting to fully understand the rhythm of the restaurant's operations. Kyle had already left for the day, leaving the night shift to drift by quietly in the dim light and the clatter of cleared-away cutlery. That's when he saw her for the first time. A slender figure emerged from the kitchen, her arms holding a tub of dirty dishes. Her auburn hair was tied back neatly, her white shirt faded from countless washes, but without a single stain. She moved with a quiet proficiency, as if every motion had been taught in a past life. "You must be Gary, the blogger Kyle mentioned." Her voice was soft, not wary, but not warm either. The kind of tone one could only develop after years of no longer expecting anything from anyone. Darren stood up to shake her hand. "Gary Mitchell, a pleasure to meet you. I wanted to observe the night shift for a bit, if you don't mind." Her handshake was firm, brief, and decisive. He immediately noticed the calluses on her palm, not those of an office worker. These were the hands of someone who had worked a stove, lifted heavy trays, known pain, and kept on working. "I don't mind. I'm just cleaning a few things. If you need anything, just let me know," she said. Then turned toward the coffee station and began the process of cleaning each nozzle, each coffee stain on the counter, as if the entire world was contained within those smudges. Darren watched. In the silence, he saw the things no one said, the way she leaned to avoid making too much noise, the way she washed her hands 3 times after wiping a table, the way her eyes flickered when a late customer walked in. She wasn't just working, she was protecting herself, every minute, every second. "Can I help you clear a few tables? I used to be a server in college. Still remember a little," Darren offered. She paused. 1 second, 2, then gave a slight nod. "If you want." They began to clear tables together without saying much. Darren pulled out chairs. She wiped the tables. He arranged the silverware. She scrubbed the sink. The whole room seemed to soften in their unspoken coordination. "So, that famous pancake dish. I bet you've tried it." "Right?" Darren asked, as if in passing. Nora's hand paused for a moment. Then she replied, "I have. I prep most of the ingredients for it every night." "What do you think of it?" She put the cleaning cloth down, turning her face away. "It's just a pancake. As long as the customers are happy, who makes it doesn't really matter." Her voice was gentle, but in her eyes was an entire ocean, calm on the surface. After they finished cleaning, Darren saw Nora head back to the kitchen. On instinct, he followed, and then, before him was a sight that made his heart tighten. Nora was preparing the pancake batter for the next day, but not according to the recipe hanging on the wall. She did it from memory, by feel. A pinch of cinnamon, not in the official recipe. The egg whites, whipped separately, just as his grandmother used to do. A dash of vanilla, poured from an unlabeled bottle. Her hands stirred the batter with a cracked wooden spoon, slowly, as if she were speaking to the past. The scent of the batter wafted through the air, transporting Darren back to Grandma Rose's kitchen. the same scent, the same spirit. But this time, the cook wasn't his long-lost grandmother, but a woman with no name on the list of achievements, no photo in the reports, no voice that had ever been heard. And then Darren understood it was she, no one else, who had created that pancake, that recipe. He spoke up. "It's not the standard version." Nora stopped, without turning around. "No, but it brings the customers back. Have you thought about taking credit for it?" Nora let out a small, joyless laugh. "Take credit? You think I have a chance? In this system, whoever has the loudest voice wins. I'm just the person who cleans the kitchen at night. No one sees, and no one asks." Darren was speechless. Her eyes still weren't on him, but every word she uttered seemed to carve itself into his chest. At that moment, he didn't know about the car she was sleeping in, the dinners she skipped to save money, or the napkin with the recipe that Kyle had secretly taken. But just from that look, just from the smell of batter lingering in the air, Darren understood that a deep injustice had occurred. And he, the man who thought he was a CEO, who understood his people better than anyone, had been completely blind to it until now. The kitchen was now lit only by the pale yellow light reflecting off the clean tile floor. The wall clock showed 10:07 p.m. Outside, the Portland rain fell steadily like a sad lullaby. Darren stood motionless by the prep table, where Nora was doing something no camera had ever recorded, no report had ever mentioned. She wasn't reading a recipe. She was remembering. She wasn't measuring with spoons or scales. She was using her senses. She wasn't cooking by order. She was creating something from her very soul. And Darren, a man who had opened hundreds of restaurants, hired thousands of chefs, suddenly felt small and ignorant. He watched her every move, an egg white, whipped soft with a fork, then gently folded into the batter as if embracing something fragile, cinnamon, vanilla, baking powder, but not according to the formula. She didn't even taste test. She just needed to smell it. The aroma rose, sweet, warm, gentle. It was no longer a pancake. It was a memory. Darren took a deep breath and whispered, "This is the real recipe, isn't it?" Nora paused, without turning her head. A beat of silence passed. "Yes, you're the one who created it. This time." She turned. No nod, no denial, just a look. Her dark brown eyes holding no resentment. Only something very old, very real, as if she had been waiting for someone to ask that question for a very long time. "Yes, but—" Her voice was low. "Don't tell anyone." Darren frowned. "Why? Why would you let Kyle take the credit? Do you know this recipe could change the entire system?" Nora gave a small laugh, the kind of laugh that no longer believes in dreams. "You're asking me why? Because I don't have a college degree, no one to back me up, no voice in the meetings. I'm a shadow. I make pancakes in the middle of the night. Who would believe me?" She turned back, washing her hands, her movements as meticulous as if she were washing away her sorrow. Do you know what it feels like to have the only thing you've ever created taken from you and not be able to claim it back? Darren swallowed hard. His heart was pounding in his chest, but for a strange reason he felt ashamed. She untied her apron, hung it on a hook, grabbed her bag, and prepared to leave. "Nora," he called out softly, "you saved this restaurant." She froze, then replied, without turning back, "Does it matter when my name isn't on the receipt?" And then she walked out the back door, leaving the silent kitchen with the lingering scent of her batter. Darren stood there, alone, in a kitchen that smelled of his childhood. But this time, he didn't feel comfort. He felt awakened. He used to think running a restaurant chain was about formulas, costs, marketing, and customer feedback. He had forgotten the human element, the one factor that could never be written into a report. A recipe written from memory. A pancake made by hands that trembled after a long shift. A quiet woman, living in the shadows, being forgotten. That night, in his hotel room, Darren opened his laptop but didn't type a word into the revenue report. Instead, he accessed the internal camera system, something he rarely touched. A gut feeling told him the truth wasn't in words. It was in the moments no one was watching. He rewound the footage of the branch from a week ago. He searched for the late-night hours when the restaurant was closed. And then he saw it. Nora, 11:48 p.m., silently walking into the kitchen, starting to mix batter, testing small versions, writing notes on a piece of an old napkin. Darren's throat tightened when he saw the moment at 2:30 a.m. when Nora tasted a piece of the pancake, then closed her eyes and let out a tiny smile, the only smile he had ever seen from her. She folded the napkin, left it on the counter, and then cleaned up as if nothing had ever happened. The next morning, the camera recorded Kyle arriving early. He walked into the kitchen, picked up the napkin, read it, and then stuffed it into his jacket pocket. That napkin, that memory, that recipe had been stolen. And in that moment, Darren understood this was no longer about a pancake. This was about justice. It was about giving a name back to a forgotten soul. 4 in the morning. The hotel room in downtown Portland was bathed in the cold, dim light of a laptop screen. Darren Locke hadn't slept a wink. His third cup of coffee sat cold on the edge of the desk, next to his phone, which was on airplane mode. On the screen, the security camera footage continued to play in slow motion. He had found what he needed. The night of November 7th, Nora entered the kitchen at 11:47 p.m. Alone. No one followed. No one was watching. She mixed batter, tested the recipe, adjusting every detail over and over again, and then, at around 2:34 a.m., she stopped, sat down on a stainless steel stool, brought a small piece of pancake to her lips, and closed her eyes. In that moment, a woman with no home, no recognition, had found something that made her smile, a real, rare smile, like a light at the end of a tunnel. She folded the napkin where she had written the recipe, placed it on the counter, cleaned up immaculately, and then left. The video ended. Darren was stunned, but he didn't stop. He opened the video from the next day, when Kyle arrived earlier than usual. The camera recorded him walking into the kitchen, looking around, picking up that napkin, reading it carefully, and then stuffing it into the inner pocket of his jacket. Not a word, not a moment of hesitation, not a single note of acknowledgement. But that wasn't the final shock. Darren switched to the camera behind the building, the one most people used for security monitoring. And there, he saw something that made his stomach clench. An old Honda Civic, parked behind the kitchen area, right next to the industrial dumpster, night after night. The same time, the same movements. Nora would go out back, take out pieces of cardboard, and cover the car windows. She would sit in the driver's seat, pull out a thin blanket, rest her head on her backpack, and read a worn-out book with a small flashlight. She was living there. In the parking lot, right behind where she worked, Darren sat frozen, unable to speak. The images overlapped in his mind. The woman who quietly created the dish that saved the branch. The one whose credit was stolen, whom no one would believe. The one living silently in a car with taped-up windows. Every morning, she would wake up early, pack everything away, and walk into the restaurant as if nothing had happened. He scrolled to the footage from 2 days ago. Kyle arrived early, just as Nora was emerging from behind the building. He looked at her, then said something. The camera had no audio, but his lips were easy to read. Don't let the customers see you lurking behind the dumpsters. It looks bad. Nora bowed her head. No reaction. Not a single word in response. Darren clenched his fists. For the first time in years, he felt an anger so intense it made him tremble. He sat in silence for a long time after that, doing nothing. No notes, no reports, because everything he had just seen couldn't be processed simply as a CEO. This was no longer about a restaurant chain, not about a pancake. This was the story of a person who had been made invisible, a person who had to cede the spotlight to someone else, just to survive. And he, Darren Locke, was the only one now who had the power, the position, the strength to stop it from happening again. The next day, he left Portland on the earliest flight, without a word to Kyle. He didn't need to. The truth was glaringly obvious. As the plane took off, Darren looked out at the cloudy sky and whispered a single sentence. Nora, I see you, and this time I won't look away. Darren Locke's private jet landed in Seattle at 6:23 a.m. He didn't have much luggage, just a small suitcase, his laptop, and a file folder containing the printed stills from the Portland branch's camera footage. But his mind was a storm, the warm scent of pancakes, Nora's resigned eyes, the stolen napkin, and the sound of Portland rain on the roof of an old car where an anonymous genius was trying to survive each night. The only question that repeated in his head was, how many other Noras are having their dreams stolen within this system without my knowledge? 8 a.m., 22nd floor conference room, Maple and Hearth headquarters. Darren stood before a row of department heads: finance, HR, innovation, legal, and operations. No projector screen, no revenue charts. Just direct questions aimed at the psyche. Over the past 5 years. He began. We have given out hundreds of innovation initiative bonuses to managers, supervisors, and branch directors. But how many of you can be certain that those ideas actually came from them? The room fell silent. Sarah Chin, head of human resources, spoke up gently. Darren, if you're referring to a specific incident, we can handle it on a case-by-case basis. But what you're suggesting is that we have a rotten system. Darren cut in, his voice sharp as a knife. A system that has been rewarding the credit takers, not the value creators. He placed the file on the table. It contained all the evidence, the video of Nora preparing the recipe, the footage of Kyle taking the napkin, the email claiming credit, and the clip of Nora sleeping in her car after her shift. Each photo was a knife to the pride this system had once clung to. I want to launch an internal creative audit, Darren declared. Every bonus, every idea ever approved, will be reinvested. If someone has taken credit from another, we will right that wrong and apologize. The head of the legal department was flustered. Darren, with a scale of 847 branches, this will be a costly investigation. Thousands of files, hundreds of hours reviewing camera footage and listening to testimonies. I'm not asking about the cost, Darren replied, his eyes burning. I'm asking about justice over the next 48 hours. The Maple and Hearth system was turned upside down. More than 200 files were reopened. Emails sent to the innovation team were cross-referenced with camera footage, timesheets, kitchen logs, and even handwriting. Inside the data repository, a pattern of repetition emerged. Denver, a night shift janitor, invented an organic waste disposal method that saved $40,000 a year. The bonus was given to the supervisor. Austin, a part-time employee, came up with a customer loyalty program, but the regional manager took all the credit and the bonus. Tampa, a chef created a gluten-free pastry recipe that became a hit with allergy-prone customers, but the name on the submission was the franchise owner. Darren sat in his office until well past midnight each day, his eyes red, his gut churning. Emails from real people with real stories poured in like a waterfall. I used to think my dreams weren't worth seeing. Thank you for being the first person to ask, who actually did this? I don't need the money. I just need my name in the right place. On the third night, Darren called Sarah Start, making a list of those who had their credit stolen. I want them to get their rewards, even if it means paying 3 times over. Are you sure some of them have quit, moved away, or even I'm more sure than I've ever been in my life? But the hardest part was yet to come, convincing Nora to trust him. He knew what she had endured was not just a loss of money or reputation. It was a shattered sense of faith, and no contract could mend that. On Thursday afternoon, Darren drove back to the Portland branch. He didn't call ahead, he didn't wear a suit, he didn't bring a team, just a man coming to apologize to a woman who had been rejected by his own system. A light rain was falling in Portland as Darren pulled up to the Maple and Hearth branch, where it all began. Through the misty window, he saw Nora wiping the coffee counter as usual. No one paid him any attention, and that was what pained him the most, a silent genius, still being treated as invisible by the world. Darren walked in, not as the CEO, not wearing a name tag, just Darren, a man who owed another person a real apology. Nora looked up when she saw him. A flicker of surprise in her eyes was quickly replaced by caution. "Mr. Locke." She used his real name. "I didn't expect to see you again." Darren placed his leather briefcase on the counter and pulled up a stool. "I didn't expect to be back so soon either. But there's something I needed to do right away, or I wouldn't be able to sleep." Nora continued wiping the table. No questions, no pressure. She was used to people coming, saying important things, and then leaving without leaving anything behind. Darren took out 2 folders, one thin, one thick. "I know Kyle has apologized to you," he began, "but I'm not here to talk about him. I'm here to talk about you and the truth." He opened the thinner folder. Inside were printed copies of Kyle's email claiming the recipe, stills from the security cameras, and a timeline cross-referencing the dates to prove Nora was the one who had created the legendary pancake recipe. "We have reinvestigated our entire innovation process over the last 5 years. We found at least 37 cases like yours, where frontline employees had their credit stolen. But your case is special, Nora, because it wasn't just a recipe. You breathed soul into a system that was slowly dying." Nora put down her cloth. "And what do you want to do with that truth?" Darren pushed a thick envelope toward her. "The $5,000 bonus, plus interest, and an official apology from Maple and Hearth." "But that's just the beginning." He opened the second folder, a thick, clean contract with the word confidential in the top corner. "We want to offer you a newly created position, head of creative menu development. You will work directly with the branches, develop recipes, lead creative staff, and most importantly, every recipe you create will be credited to your name, and you'll receive a share of the profits." Nora didn't answer right away. She looked at the contract, then at Darren, then at her own hands, still slightly damp from wiping the tables. "Do you know who I am?" she asked, her voice small but sharp. "I don't have a college degree. I have no fixed address. I live in my car. I once quit a job because I was being overloaded with night shifts. I am not the model of a department head." Darren leaned forward, his voice low, no longer a CEO, but a man who had been blind. "You have something no school can teach. Nora, you have the ability to make people feel food, not just eat it. You have intuition, creativity, and the courage to create light while standing in the dark." He took out the last page of the contract and pointed to the bolded text, "Recipient Nora Elizabeth Santos, title Head of Creative Menu Development. We want to start over, and this time start with the right person." Nora was silent. No smile, no tears. She just turned the pages, slowly, as if this were a real dream she didn't dare to believe. "And if I agree," she asked, "can I add one condition?" Darren tilted his head. "You name it." Nora bit her lip. "I want to personally make that pancake at least once at every branch I visit. And under each plate, there will be a small, handwritten card with a sincere message, So customers remember this dish came from a person who truly loves what they do. Darren didn't hesitate. I agree, not just because you deserve it, but because it's what this company needs to learn. Nora bowed her head, her hand reaching for the pen. Then she paused. I used to think people like me were never meant to be called by name, she said, her eyes welling up slightly. Today, if I sign this, I'm not just accepting a job, I'm choosing to believe in myself for the first time. And she signed, slowly, clearly, powerfully. Nora Elizabeth Santos, the woman who had lived in the shadows, had now stepped into the light. 6 weeks after the signing in Portland, Nora Santos walked into the Maple and Hearth headquarters in Bellevue, Washington, no longer as an anonymous night shift worker, but as the head of creative menu development. She was greeted with respectful handshakes, a simple but light-filled private office, and a welcome email from the entire executive team with the subject line, "Welcome, Nora, the heart behind our pancakes." But Nora didn't come to sit in an air-conditioned office. She came to begin the quiet journey she had dreamed of while sleeping behind a restaurant dumpster, helping to bring soulful food, from real people to life. The first branch she visited was in Seattle, a busy but cookie-cutter restaurant. Here, she didn't introduce herself as the boss. She put on an apron, went into the kitchen like an intern, and did exactly as she had stipulated from the start. She made the first pancake herself, an old cast-iron skillet, the temperature controlled by her eyes, the eggs whipped separately, a single pinch of cinnamon added, and the batter stirred as if keeping time with her own heart. When the first pancake was served, along with a small card under the plate, this dish was made with care by a real person, for a real moment. Nora. The customer picked up the card, read it, then took a bite and fell silent. No advertising, no banners, just feeling. The next day, Nora sat down to talk with a hearing-impaired cook who had quietly adjusted the prep methods to reduce waste, saving the restaurant nearly $800 a week. She didn't take notes right away. She didn't send a report. She just said one thing. Would you like to share this with the entire system, with your name on it? The cook looked bewildered, then smiled like a child being called on in class for the first time. The second branch, then the third, then the fourth. Everywhere Nora went. She started with one thing: make a pancake, write a small card, listen to a person. Never before had Maple and Hearth received so much emotional feedback from customers. I didn't just have breakfast. I was reminded that there's a real person behind this food. The card made me cry. It came on my late mother's birthday. I used to hate eating alone, but today I felt like someone was eating with me. Darren followed Nora's journey from a distance. In every revenue report, beyond the numbers, there were now photos of smiling customers, acknowledgements of frontline employees, and small innovations that were finally being credited to their rightful owners. One day, he received an email from Maria, a former server who had been reprimanded for talking too much with customers, now the manager of a branch in Spokane. The email subject, "Nora made me believe." In the letter, Maria recounted how Nora had come, listened to her story as a single mother, and then invited her to collaborate on developing Mom's pancakes using almond milk and homemade apple syrup. The dish became the month's bestseller. But for Maria, what mattered wasn't the revenue, it was the feeling, for the first time, of being believed that her dreams weren't silly. Nora didn't go on television. She didn't give public speeches. She just wrote by hand, small cards under each first pancake. Sometimes a word of encouragement, sometimes a thank you, sometimes just, "You are seen." When autumn arrived, she began experimenting with a new dish, pumpkin-spiced pancakes with crystallized ginger. She wasn't in a hurry. She sat in the small kitchen of her first-ever rented apartment, a place with no car horns, no cold seeping through foggy windows, just her, the ingredients, her memories, and the right to create something without fear of it being stolen. Nora's small apartment in Bellevue was only slightly larger than the car she used to sleep in, 650 square feet, worn wooden floors, a window overlooking the old apartment complex's parking lot. But to her, this place was a palace. No one asked why she came home late. No one kicked her car door in the rain. No one ordered her to cook someone else's idea, forcing her to follow it to the gram. Here, she was free, not to rest, but to be true to herself. That night, as usual, Nora was up until 2 a.m., not because she had insomnia, but because her mind was overflowing with ideas. On the countertop, ingredients were laid out like a painter's palette: smooth pumpkin puree, crystallized ginger, lemon zest, cinnamon, nutmeg. A small pot of caramel simmered, hinting at the smell of lightly burnt butter. She didn't measure with spoons. She tasted with the tip of her tongue, remembering her mother's face as she made pumpkin soup when she was a child. She thought of the halfway hugs of her childhood, of the winter nights when she and her mother had only a piece of bread and a story to keep them warm. Each pancake she crafted was more than just food. It was a note from the past, wrapped in a warm circle, crisp at the edges, soft in the middle, fragrant like a memory toasted over a low flame. Nora named the dish Harvest Morning. No one understood the full meaning of that name but her. It was the first day she felt she deserved to harvest joy after so many seasons of sowing seeds in silence. The next morning, at headquarters, she presented this dish to the executive team. No slides, no charts, just one introductory sentence: "I'm not bringing you a recipe. I'm bringing you a feeling. And if this pancake reminds you of someone, then I've succeeded." At first, the conference room was silent. Then, one by one, they took a bite. A finance director paused mid-chew and whispered, "My mother used to make pancakes like this." A product manager wiped his glasses and said, "The caramelized edges. They sound like the skillet in my house when my father was alive." They didn't say much, but their eyes held an empathy Nora never thought she could evoke from such a small kitchen. She returned to her apartment, lay down on the kitchen floor, her hands still faintly dusted with cinnamon. The early autumn sun streamed through the window, as warm as the breath of someone who had once loved her truly. And for the first time in years, she cried, not out of self-pity, but because she knew she was being reborn. No fame needed, no awards, just a small kitchen, a skillet, and a chance to rewrite her destiny, one pancake at a time. Nora opened a new notebook, not to write recipes, but to write an autobiography in flavors. On the first page, she wrote, "I used to live to survive. Now I cook to remember." And so that someone, even just one person, feels they are not alone. The conference hall in downtown Seattle was packed. Over 200 branch managers, regional supervisors, head chefs, and executives from the Maple and Hearth system had gathered for the annual leadership conference. On the large stage, an LED screen displayed the elegant white words, "We see you." Darren Locke stepped into the spotlight. No lavalier microphone, no sales slide. He just said, "Today, I am not here to inspire. I am just a man relearning how to listen. And the person I am inviting up here is the first one who taught me how." Please welcome Nora Santos, the woman who woke up a system with just one pancake. The entire hall erupted in applause, but Nora's steps were slow, steady, and humble. She wore a simple navy blazer, her hair tied back neatly, her hands clutching a few dog-eared note cards. She didn't look directly at the camera. She looked at each face, as if searching, is there someone here who was like me, all those years ago? "Hello, everyone," she began, her voice low and slightly trembling. 18 months ago, I was a night shift employee at Portland branch number 847. I slept in my car after my shift, next to an industrial dumpster, because I couldn't afford to rent a room. The hall fell completely silent. And then I created a pancake recipe, not because I wanted to be famous, but because I missed my grandmother. I missed the Sunday mornings when she cooked without any recipe, only from the heart. She paused, her eyes swept across the hall. That recipe saved the restaurant. But my name was never mentioned. Someone else submitted it, got the bonus, the praise, the opportunity. And I continued to wash dishes, wipe tables, and tell myself, maybe, I should just stay quiet. Someone in the crowd lowered their head. Others bit their lips. The air was thick with unspoken emotion. Nora continued, her voice stronger this time. "But I have a message for anyone who is currently scrubbing a kitchen floor, wiping down a bar, or making coffee without anyone remembering their name. You are valuable. Your ideas can change an entire company. And your silence is not because you aren't good enough, but because no one has learned to listen properly yet." On the screen behind her, images appeared. A dishwasher in Colorado who created a water-saving process. A part-time employee in Texas who redesigned the kids' menu to reduce allergens. A single mother in Montana who turned oatmeal into a specialty using local spices. All of those innovations were clearly credited with the real creator's name. Today, Nora concluded, we are not just talking about food, we are asking a new question. Do we see the real person behind each plate? Are we brave enough to correct our mistakes and rewrite the honor roll with the right names? The room rose to its feet. The applause thundered like a storm, not for a great speech, but for a truth that was spoken, without varnish, without pretense. A few minutes later, Darren Locke returned to the stage. He announced a new initiative called From Kitchen to Boardroom. It included an idea submission system for all employees, regardless of position. All innovations would be clearly credited to the proposer. A mentorship program for frontline staff. A personal innovation development fund, providing seed capital for employee ideas. "We don't just serve breakfast," Darren said. "We serve hope." And Nora is living proof that by listening to the right person, you can change an entire system. As she stepped down from the stage, Nora saw a few strangers approach her, managers who had never paid attention to anyone but their KPIs. An older woman took her hand and whispered, "You just said what I've held in my heart for 15 years. A tall chef, his eyes glistening, said, "I used to live in my car too. Thank you for daring to tell your story." Nora smiled, not because she was being celebrated, but because she had spoken up and was no longer afraid. One late autumn afternoon, Nora returned to the Maple and Hearth branch in Portland, the place that had been her home, her hell, the place where she lost everything, and also where it all began again. The glass door still chimed with the familiar bell as she pushed it open, but the atmosphere inside was completely different. There was no longer fatigue in the employees' eyes, no cold, industrial feeling. Instead, there was laughter, the aroma of pancakes, and quiet, grateful glances exchanged. A young woman came out from behind the counter, with soft curly hair, a neat uniform, and a name tag that read, "Manager, Maria G." Nora recognized her immediately. She had been a part-time server, the one who often helped her stack dishes when the night shift was overwhelming. Maria exclaimed, "Nora, oh my gosh, I didn't know you were coming today. I have to show you something." She pulled Nora to a corner of the wall where only a sanitation standards sign used to hang. Now there was a dark wooden frame, and inside was the old, worn napkin, still bearing the handwritten script, the jumbled recipe notes. Below the frame was an engraved line, "Where it all began," the original notes of Nora Santos, who brought soul to our breakfast. Nora touched the glass frame. Her eyes blurred, not because of the honor, but because for the first time in her life, when she left a piece of her heart somewhere, it was cherished, not stolen, not forgotten. Maria led her into the kitchen, as excited as a student showing off an achievement. "Look, we kept your recipe exactly the same. All new staff are trained by a direct instructor, not just by reading a piece of paper." Nora saw a group of employees whipping eggs, carefully folding the whites into the batter with a gentle motion, just like she used to. But what left her speechless was, under each plate of pancakes, there was a small card, not printed from a machine, not mass photocopied, each one handwritten, in neat script. "We hope this pancake brings you a little warmth. It was made by people who truly care about you." Nora's mornings. She saw an elderly woman open a card, read it, and nod gently, her eyes welling up. A little boy eating his first ever pancake smiled brightly, holding onto the card like a treasure. And Nora understood the food she once thought was just about survival was now a language of connection between the maker and the receiver. As she was leaving, a man from a table near the door called out, "Are you Nora?" She stopped and nodded. "Thank you. This pancake." He placed a hand over his heart. "It reminded me of my wife. She passed away last year, and this is the first time I've felt like someone was cooking for me with love again." Nora didn't know what to say. She just smiled and bowed her head slightly, a gesture of thanks. She had done what no school could teach, what no restaurant could train, what no degree could prove. She made people feel love through taste. And that was when Nora understood she hadn't just changed her own destiny. She had reignited the belief that the invisible always deserved to be seen, even if only through a small card, underneath a hot pancake, and a simple message: "You are not alone." 8 months after Nora's speech at the leadership conference, Maple and Hearth was no longer just a breakfast-only restaurant chain. It had become a place where dreams were born for those who had been ignored, had their credits stolen, and been overlooked. The From Kitchen to Boardroom program was implemented system-wide. Each month, branches selected a silent influencer who didn't have to be a manager but could be a dishwasher who figured out a more efficient way to handle wastewater, a delivery driver who proposed a fuel-saving route, a college student on the night shift who shared tips on building connections with elderly customers. All were honored with a small bonus and a handwritten thank you note from headquarters signed by Darren Locke himself. Employee turnover dropped by 37%. Quarterly revenue increased by 19%. But above all, the number of internal ideas increased sixfold, and 87% came from frontline employees. At the following year's conference, Darren spoke with a voice deep with gratitude. "We used to look for innovation from the outside. Now we are learning to dig deep into our own heart, our employees." In the main headquarters hallway, where revenue targets used to hang, there was now an engraved phrase: "No one is invisible if you learn how to listen." Below it were photos of those who had once been forgotten, now mentors, department heads, and inspirers. In the center was a portrait of Nora, smiling gently, holding a wooden spoon. One winter morning, Nora woke up in her small apartment, sunlight filtering through the white curtains. She no longer had to check if her car had enough gas to keep warm, no longer had to hastily fold her blanket to avoid being discovered. Her sleep now came with a thick comforter, a name on a lease, and hope. But she didn't stop. Each month, she chose a branch to visit unannounced, not to inspect, but to spread a simple thing: trust. At a small branch in Spokane, she met Liam, a 19-year-old on the night shift, passionate about cooking, shy, and once teased as the mute chef. She asked if he had any ideas to share. He timidly presented a handwritten recipe for a chocolate pancake to give to my sister, who is undergoing cancer treatment, because she loves sweets but can't have sugar. Nora read it and said nothing. 2 months later, Liam's dark cocoa stack was introduced on the spring menu system-wide. On the menu, it clearly stated, "Created by Liam M. Age 19, night shift employee, Spokane, number 154." Another time, in Arizona. She sat and ate with a 72-year-old woman, once a regular customer, now a part-time employee to support her grandchild. They didn't talk much, just ate pancakes in silence. At the end of the meal, the woman opened the card under her plate and froze when she read the line, "You are not invisible. You are the reason we're still here." She cried. And the next day, she wrote a letter to headquarters. That was the first breakfast of my life where I felt truly invited. Nora understood she hadn't just remade her own life. She had opened a path for hearts that had been pushed aside. Now, those handwritten cards had spread to over 700 branches. Each person in charge was encouraged to write their own card. Real thanks, not from a template, just honesty. And Nora was still the one who wrote the first card for every new dish. Her life didn't start with a contract. It started with an old napkin, a few scribbled lines, and the belief that food could be a voice for those who were not being heard. Now, on every plate of pancakes served across America, underneath the fragrant syrup, was a small message. No two were alike, but they all shared one thing in common: kindness, and the courage to see the real person behind every uniform. On the small kitchen table in her Bellevue apartment, Nora pinned one last card to her memo board, not to send, but to keep. She wrote, "Breakfast can't change the whole world, but if it makes someone feel seen, remembered, and loved, that's a good enough start."